Thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. Today we're going to be talking about the Colt 1862 police model percussion revolver. It's a 5-shot 36 caliber gun that fits into the niche that you see today with things like the Hellcat and the Sig Sauer P365. A gun that's small enough to easily carry, but also big enough to be a fighting gun. At 36 caliber with 17 grains of 3F black powder and a paper cartridge, this is not a powerhouse, but it was sufficiently powerful at the time to be considered a fighting gun. It wasn't just a backup gun. In that regard, it was very popular amongst police, but everyone as well, because this is pretty much the apex, I would argue, of the percussion gun development by Colt. After this, we started going to cartridge revolvers and things changed quite a bit. That said, I want to use this on the clock today at the backup gun match, which is a match designed for low round count stages that are based around practical shooting scenarios. And I want to see how we can do with an 1862 Colt police model. I'm going to be doing a series of these on InRange. The LeMat, the 1860 Colt, the Remington New Army, pretty much all of them. And I want to see how those Civil War era and post-Civil War era guns work on the clock as fighting guns. Now, I also want to go through some of this as well as how these were actually used. Today we're going to be using paper cartridges, and I'm going to talk about that more later in the video, as well as what needs to be done to make this Uberti replica something reliable to actually use on the clock, because unfortunately a lot of these Italian replicas are more like kit guns than they are something you can just take out of the box and use. So stay tuned. So most people, when they load these guns nowadays, they use loose powder, pour it into the cylinder, use a wad, and then put a ball and then ram it in, and then eventually cap it, which makes it live. But that's not how things were really done back in the day. Back in the day, people really weren't reloaders. They actually used paper cartridges. Now these are round ball. Most of the time they would have been conicals at the time, but I made these with round ball. And this is a really cool kit that you can get from capandball.eu. He made reproductions of this. But the average person back in the day didn't reload any more than the average person does today. They would buy these from the store, and this would have been the equivalent of a standard cartridge used today. And you would open it up, and you would dump these little boys out, and as you can see, they're just paper cartridges. And these were hand rolled by myself. They would have been rolled by the factory back in the day, but I did this with coffee filters. But you would set the gun to half cock, take your paper cartridge, seat it down into the cylinder, align it with the ram, and then just ram it home. And then you do the same to fill all 5 of the chambers, at least on this 1862 Colt police model. You can see this is much faster than loose paper, or loose powder and loose balls. This is not the modern equivalent of what we do now, but man, what a difference. And you can make these paper cartridges yourself with the kit that you can get from capandball.eu. It's time consuming, but it's a lot more fun to shoot these out in the field this way as well. And it's of course recreating history. So that was as long as it took. Get that old paper out of there. And we have now loaded all 5 chambers. Now, but I'm not going to cap this gun at the time, but what you would do normally is still at half cock, you would get your caps, and you would put 1 cap on each firing cone. And then once you've loaded all 5, unlike a single action army, you can safely actually put the hammer between chambers, and you are now safe to carry all 5 chambers loaded, even with the percussion caps on. But since I'm in a match environment, I'm not going to cap this until I get over there. So another thing you're going to hear about on these reproductions, but also the originals to a lesser degree, and Colts in particular versus a lot of other designs, are susceptible to cap jams. So your percussion cap sits on the firing cone, and when you fire it, the cap explodes, pieces of it fall into the action. But that's not exactly what's going on. The originals had different dimensions of the firing chamber, and they were less likely to cause back pressure of gas to cause the hammer to bounce like this. So if you overcharge the gun with a too high pressure charge, or the firing cones are improperly designed, what happens is as the gun fires, gas pushes the projectile down the barrel, but gas also comes out of the firing cone and pushes the hammer and causes the hammer to bounce. And when the hammer bounces, that's what allows the cap, or fragments of the cap, to fall into the action. If the gun fires and the gas does not cause the hammer to bounce, that keeps the cap on the firing cone, and when you cycle the action to get to the next chamber, that cap just stays or falls off out the side, and that prevents cap jams. However, Italian manufacturing is inconsistent, and when you buy reproductions, whether it's Pieta or Uberti, sometimes these cones are not the proper size or shape, as well as they have the improper firing chamber. One of the first things you can do to make any of your cap and ball guns more reliable and more consistent is to replace the firing cones with what are called slicks shot, S-L-I-X shot nipples. You got to get them for Pieta or Uberti. You just screw them in, and now you have two things going on. One, you'll see there's a little tiny vent hole there. You may not be able to see it, but there is. And that causes back pressure to actually vent out the side of the cone versus back, preventing hammer bounce. As well as now all of your firing cones are Remington number 10 size percussion caps for all of your guns. So if you have a cap and ball gun, I cannot more highly recommend replacing all of your firing cones with slicks shot, S-L-I-X-S-H-O-T nipples, and reducing your powder charge to the original historical charge. And if you do that, cap jams should almost become a thing of the past. And if you crack it, me on the left. Look at that. Well, the match is over. There were 6 people in the backup revolver division, and out of those 6, I placed 3rd overall, beating 3 people with modern equipment. I think that's a testament to how high quality the 1862 Colt police model really was. And in the 1860s, 1870s, and even the 1880s, if you knew what you were doing and how to handle this properly, this was a perfectly serviceable self-defense revolver. A lot of things go into making this a reliable gun, at least in the modern era. As I said, you need to replace those cones with something other than what comes from the factory. You need to go with the historical powder charge so you don't get the hammer bounce and cap jams. And I have fired 25 rounds today, and the gun is completely still serviceable. Black powder fouling has not caused this to seize up or jam in any way. I've had 100% reliability today. And it's a testament to the Colt design, because a lot of the other revolvers at that time had a problem with black powder fouling. But the arbor inside of the Colt designs, all of them with the exception of the Patterson, have grease grooves in it that are designed to deal with the fouling. Kind of like tread in a tire, the fouling gets in those rings, in those grooves, and it causes the gun to not seize up, or prevents it from seizing up, I should say. And it's one of the reasons the Colt was one of the most preferred revolvers of its time. And if you see what you're doing here and you do this right, there really wasn't a compelling argument for a lot of people to change from cap and ball, if they already had this gun, in the 1870s or 1880s, because for the most part, most people thought at the time, you had your 5 shots, they were not necessarily gunfighters, and if they knew what they were doing, a cap and ball revolver could be very reliable. Now, it is possible to get cap jams, and when they happen, the gun's out of commission, and you are playing a risk with that. But generally speaking, properly sized cones, proper caps, and proper powder charge, you're not going to see that happen. So, guys, I think it's a really interesting and fun thing to do, to come out and shoot something like this. And hopefully you like this kind of content, because I plan on doing a whole bunch more about Civil War era weapons and beyond here on the clock and otherwise on InRangeTV, because I don't think you see a lot of that. And it really is interesting to see how practical and viable these weapons were as far back as the 1860s. So stay tuned for the LeMat, the 1860, the Remington, and far more. If you are a Patreon supporter, I have to thank you very much, because this pistol, the cones, the black powder, everything that you saw today was paid for by Patreon support to be able to do content like this for you that's hopefully unique on the internet. I would remind you that the cartridge making devices that the cartridge making kit that I purchased, as well as the reproduction box, came from capandball.eu, another great channel here on YouTube. But once again, thank you Patreon supporters for making this kind of content viable and for keeping InRange alive. If you're not a supporter, please consider it. If you can't be, I totally understand. Just subscribe to one of our multiple distribution networks. You can find them all at InRange.tv. Thanks, and share with your friends.